So, welcome to this retreat. Welcome to our retreat. The Earth is our witness, loving self and world through the climate crisis. It's a home retreat led by members of the Triratna Earth Sangha. And as you know, it's the weekdays this week, 18th to 22nd of April, leading to a celebration of Earth Day on Friday, on the 22nd of April. So Triratna Earth Sangha groups are emerging at different centres around the world, and we want to bring us together, bring these different members and groups of the Triratna Earth Sangha together in this home retreat, and we'll be meditating, studying, and creating ritual space together. We'll be offering 3 sessions a day. That is 9 to 11 in the morning, 3:30 to 5 in the afternoon, and 7:30 to 9 p.m. in the evening. Those are all UK times. And I guess I'm sure you've seen the program. So my name is Shanti Garber. I'm one of the co-founders and conveners of the Triratna Earth Sangha. And this morning, I'm going to be introducing Sarvajit, who's our presenter for this morning. So just a couple of things first, a bit of housekeeping. This is a retreat. So I know for some of us, it's like online retreats are, we're used to them, and for others, it might be quite a new thing. So I suggest that you explore for yourself a retreat plan that's going to work for you. And in particular, to avoid Zoom fatigue, which is a thing nowadays, as you probably know, to avoid Zoom fatigue and get the most from the retreat, maybe limit screen time to the sessions. So apart from the sessions, maybe just kind of leave the phone or move away from the computer and do other stuff. Because if you're on screen for the sessions plus the time working and so on, then that could get quite wearying, quite fatiguing. And if you want to switch off the camera at any time during the sessions, please feel relaxed about that. Some people feel a bit more relaxed if they switch their camera off. Although, of course, it does help the retreat presenter to be able to see people and see your reactions as well. So it does help if we can see how people are doing, how people are responding. So we have a couple of websites that we can tell you about. The first is our dedicated retreat site. So I'll put the link in the chat. This is our dedicated site for anyone who wants to connect with the retreat. It's maintained by our team. Every day we'll add catch-up videos for the daily sessions in case you missed them. So that's the main function, is that it's basically on demand. The sessions are on demand. You can catch up. You can watch sessions later in your own time. And if Sarvajit or any of the presenters share a video or resource during the session, we'll put that on that site as well. So that's our dedicated retreat site, catch-up site. And then we also have a kind of community whiteboard. I'll put that in the chat. So this is for anyone taking part in the retreat to share resources, inspiration, etc. So it could be things like you could share a picture of your shrine or something related to the session, stories or thoughts, responses of your own, poems. If Sarvajit mentions a book or a film, you can put that on there as a reference and so on. And yeah, if there are any broader resources, we'll post them there as well. So that's the Padlet. We'll refer to that as the Padlet, which is our kind of whiteboard. Okay, so I think that's it for the time being. It's the housekeeping. Okay, so any questions or comments, put them in the chat and I will field those. Yeah, so I'd like to introduce Sarvajit and his session. So this session runs till 11 a.m. There'll be a break halfway through. I guess we'll have a 10-minute bio break halfway through. So Sarvajit is from Cambridge, and he's going to present a session on climate doomism and the 4 reminders, and you'll find out more about those, what those 4 reminders are. And his question is, well, how to think about the question, what's the point of fighting for change when the odds are so stacked against us? What's the point of fighting for change when the odds are stacked against us? Sarvajit is an order member from the Cambridge, connected with the Cambridge Buddhist Center. He's run a Sangha action group, which is now become the Triratna Earth Sangha, for several years. And he was co-founder of Silent Rebellion. So he might tell you a bit about that. I'll put the link in the chat there. He recently led a 6-week course on how Buddhist principles can help us face the many challenges of the modern world. So over to Sarvajit.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Shantagaba, and welcome everyone. It's good to see so many. It looks like 33 participants so far, so that's wonderful. What I'm going to start with, actually, normally I think the sessions we would have a meditation and then the talk, but I've decided to flip that round. I've done this talk and meditation a couple of times, and it works better if I do the talk and then a meditation which sort of is based on that talk and allows you to reflect on it. But because we're not doing the meditation first, I thought we'd spend just 5 minutes, 3 minutes technically, just doing a 3-minute breathing space, which many of you probably have done before. So I thought I'd just lead us in that, just as a way of us all arriving from our starts of our busy days and stuff, and getting in connection with the retreat, and then I'll get into the talk. So if we do the 3-minute breathing space, for those who aren't aware of it, it's 3 stages of 1 minute each, surprise, surprise. First one, just attending to what's actually going on for you. Second minute, spending some time focusing on the breath. And then the 3rd minute, broadening out a bit and sort of attending to the body sensations for you. It's just a way of arriving, really. So if everyone would like to get into a meditation posture of some form or other, just adopting a sort of erect and comfortable but alert posture, and then gently close your eyes, and then we'll start for the first minute, just bringing your awareness to your inner experience, whatever's going on now. What is my experience right now? So what thoughts are going through your mind? What feelings are there? Turn towards any feelings of discomfort. Just acknowledge those. What body sensations are you experiencing right now? Just a quick body scan, picking up any areas of tension or tightness. Now in the second minute, redirecting your attention to the physical sensations of your breath. So in particular, perhaps the movement of the breath in the abdomen. Just noticing the abdomen expanding and contracting with the breath. Following the breath all the way in, all the way out. anchoring yourself in the present moment. Now in the third minute, expanding your attention and getting a sense of your whole body. So your posture, facial expression, becoming aware of any sensations of discomfort or tension. Just exploring those sensations and befriending them as best you can. So now in your own time, just bringing this brief practice to a close. Okay. So it looks like everyone's back in the room, as they say. So yeah, welcome again, everyone. Really good to see everyone. As Shanti said, what I'm wanting to explore today is the emotions that arise when we're thinking about something as huge and well, as climate change, something so massive that can really lead to feelings of despair and overwhelm. And what I'm going to talk about can actually be used whenever we face something difficult. It's not particularly targeted towards climate change. Anything that threatens to overwhelm us. So I've recently been on a solitary retreat. As you all know, you're away from all the news and stuff like that when you're on solitary. And one thing that really struck me when I came back and started picking up on what was going on in the world again was just what a perfect storm we're currently facing. There's obviously the Ukraine war, which is dominating the headlines and thoughts at the moment, but there's rising cases of COVID again. There's the whole cost of living crisis that people are living through, and there's the climate disaster. All this stuff is coming on. There is just so much suffering in the world that we keep on having to take in and sort of engage with. So as well as reaching out in whatever way we can to those who need our help, I also think we really need to be mindful of our own well-being during these difficult times, because it is so easy to get overwhelmed and sort of drift into a feeling of despair, which doesn't really help anybody particularly. So I'm hoping that these reflections will help with that in whatever way you engage with the world. What I'm going to start with is a quote from Joanna Macy, which really sums up a lot of what I'm going to say. So she says, "This is a dark time filled with suffering and uncertainty. Like living cells in a larger body, it is natural that we feel the trauma of our world. So don't be afraid of the anguish you feel, or the anger, or the fear, because these responses arise from the depth of your caring and the truth of your interconnectedness with all beings." So I think that's the first thing that we actually need to do, is to recognize this emotion and accept that it's actually a natural reaction to the crisis we're all facing. If we didn't feel that, then in some ways it might be that we're just indifferent to what's going on in the world, which isn't very helpful at all. As Thich Nhat Hanh says, what we most need to do is to hear within us the sound of the earth crying. So our biggest fear with the environmental crisis is that sort of deep-rooted fear that we're doomed, And so we tend to look away if we're not careful. We could say, well, we're doomed, this is terrible, and we just look away, turn away from all that anguish and pain. Now, Buddhism doesn't offer any easy answers to this problem, but it does say that it's much better to face our fears rather than pretend that they don't exist. Because if we don't, then we just get trapped in a sort of prism of fear and doom. We tighten up, we just sort of get trapped in all these concerns, which isn't very helpful for ourselves or the world. And as Thich Nhat Hanh again says, he says, your despair is the worst thing that can happen. And it's actually, from a climate disaster point of view, it's actually what the fossil fuel companies now want us to believe. They can't justify anymore their actions or claim that there's nothing to worry about. I think they've given up on arguing about the science, and people are now experiencing, climate disasters all around the world. So they haven't, they're no longer sort of in denial, if you like. But there's an increasing dialogue of what's been termed climate doomism, where they're promoting the fact, they're actually pushing the fact that we can't make these changes that everybody wants. And these changes won't amount to anything substantial. So therefore, let's just wait for some magical technological solution to save us sometime in the future. And in the meantime, let's carry on with business as usual. So this is what the fossil fuel guys are now promoting and wanting us to believe, because then we'll give up, we'll stop any sort of form of activism we might be involved in and just sort of accept the norm. In Buddhist terms, this is often what's called horrified anxiety, which is a near enemy of compassion. So you get fixed on a doom-laden sort of vision of the future and become completely engulfed and entangled in it. And it's not compassion because it's very self-referential. You get caught up with your own responses, your own concern, and you're not actually very open to the experience of suffering for either yourself or other people. You're not very comfortable with being with it. The difference with compassion is that whilst you can see the suffering in the world, you can also see the end of that suffering, or you try to see the end of that suffering. And you really wish for that suffering to end, both for yourself, for others, for the world itself. And you can then actually take some positive action to try and reduce that suffering. Rather than turning away from it, you actually accept it, see it for what it is, turn towards it, and then think, how can I creatively respond to the problems that I'm seeing, to the suffering that I'm seeing? And so that's where this question arises. So how can you move from this negativity of despair to this more positive emotion of compassion, which can help us to energize your creative response? And I think this is a really excellent question. It's probably a question that every climate activist I've met asks themselves from time to time. You know, what is the point of fighting for change when the odds are so stacked against us? So Shanti Garby mentioned this course that I was running for 6 weeks. It was looking at climate change and other sort of modern day problems that we're engaged with, and seeing how Buddhism can inform us. And this was asked on the course. I'd given a whole evening of this is how to respond to climate change, and then there was this email exchange and a sort of, but what is the point? I can see what you're talking about. So I put this together to try and help the people on my course, and then felt actually this is quite a useful framework, and I've tweaked it a bit since then to use a very standard Buddhist framework that a lot of you are probably aware of, called the Four Reminders. So these four reminders are reflections that Tibetan monks used to distill some of the Buddha's most essential teachings, and is now become known as the Four Reminders. So I'll go through each of them in turn and sort of relate it to climate change and how we can respond. But the four reminders are: this human birth is precious, an opportunity to awaken. The body is impermanent. Death is certain. The cause and effect of karma shapes the course of my life. Life has inevitable difficulties. No one can control it all. And just to be clear, these reflections are far more profound than the way I'm going to use them today. They can be used at any times. I quite often use them before my morning meditation. It's a very good way of reminding yourself of some of the core Buddhist teachings. But I thought it would be just instructive to apply these to the question that I just posed. So going through each of them in turn, this human birth is precious, an opportunity to awaken. So in this context, I think what this encourages us to do is get in touch with our true values and really try and recognize our sources of inspiration. So why are we engaged in climate activism? Why are we concerned about the planet? In Buddhism, we are encouraged to be true individuals and not to be influenced by group pressure or societal norms. And if you're a true individual, then you need to be in touch with your core values. And if you can be in touch with those core values, then you can pace your whole life around those rather than trying to fit into what society might be telling you that you need to do. And if that includes changing your life for the benefit of all beings, then you will be inspired to do this. Because really, what is the alternative? If you want life to have meaning, then it needs to align with your deepest values. If you don't align with your deepest values, then you're kind of just going through the motions. And if you care for living beings, then however dark the question might be, you want to feel inspired to try and do your little bit. And we can live out our core values with a natural practice of ethics and an emotional connection to the whole world. So trying to imagine a positive future, and as Gandhi says, be the change that you want to see. So that's the first of the reflections, is really trying to understand, what am I worried about? What is it that brings me to be concerned about the climate? And how can I then relate to that and use it as a source of inspiration rather than this sort of climate doomism I've spoken. So the second reminder is the body is impermanent, death is certain. And this is a central Buddhist teaching that things change, everything changes, nothing stays the same. And this can be a real inspirational thought that, however bad the situation is, it's going to change. It may well change for the worse, but it's possible that it might change for the better. So you can remind yourself, impermanence is this underlying reality upon which the Buddha really based his whole teaching of liberation. And whilst this can be challenging, it can also be inspiring because change creates opportunity. And as Martin Luther King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So you might be able to get in touch with that feeling that actually change is inevitable, but that potentially it might be a change for the better. And as Martin Luther King says, perhaps it will always bend towards justice in the long run. I think this is true with our current society. And sometimes this change can happen very, very quickly. So entrenched conventional ignorance that seems like it's been around forever can undergo a paradigm shift really quite quickly and transform into a new, clearer way of understanding. And often, this after decades of sort of heartfelt efforts behind it, a huge shift in thinking can happen seemingly overnight. So it's what Joanna Macy refers to as the tipping point. That suddenly things will change, and once the tipping point has reached, then conventional wisdom can change at real breathtaking speed. And not only is this change possible, but it's actually inevitable given the laws of Buddhism. It can alter the way that whole societies think once it's forced to wake up to what's true. So you can think about issues that have seemingly changed overnight. I can think of things in my lifetime, like society's attitude to drink driving. When I was a young sort of teenager, young lad, kind of one of those things that people did, and it was a bit of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. People could get away with it. And then suddenly there was this sort of drink, it became a sort of social pariah for you to be drink driving. Another example was the wearing of fur coats, which at one point was very fashionable. And then almost overnight, it was something that people just wouldn't be seen. I was going to say seen dead wearing. That's probably the wrong phrase, but anyway. So these things change, and these things change dramatically very quickly. And this is certainly possible with the climate emergency. Although there is a real rational reason for despair, and as Joanna Macy says, we need to recognise that, we can also be inspired by the rapid shift happening in our collective consciousness around this issue. So I remember being seen as a crank not that long ago, maybe 10 years ago, when I was banging on about the dangers of climate change. And now it's news every day, really. I mean, it wasn't particularly in the news until quite recently, and then the XR rebellions happened in April and October only a couple of years ago, and suddenly it's everybody's major concern. I think it's listed as one of the major concerns by over 3/4 of the population now. So things do change dramatically, and we need to notice those changes and be inspired by those changes when we feel that things aren't going quite well. So that's the second one. The third reminder is the cause and effect of karma shapes the course of my life. So as we've seen, change can happen, but another aspect of despair is this feeling that you can't make a difference, that it's all too late, that there are way too many powerful forces pushing business as usual, and that there's nothing that little old me can do about it. So how can we deal with this aspect of despair? Well, the first thing is to recognise that everything that you do makes a difference, both to yourself and to others. So the law of karma clearly shows that every action has an impact. And if nothing else, whatever you do can have a positive effect on yourself, regardless of any external impact. Just the intention and the effort of trying to do something positive will have a positive effect on your mental state. And as the Dhammapada says, do not underestimate good, thinking it will not approach me. The water pot becomes full by the constant falling of drops of water. Similarly, the wise man, little by little, fills himself with good. So every small action will have an impact and will build on that drop in the pond. And every small action also has a difference externally, whether you notice it or not. So a favourite parable of mine is one that I call the starfish story. So a mother and daughter are walking along on a beach, and there's been some sort of big tsunami type event, some massive wave, and it's washed thousands and thousands and thousands of starfish up onto this beach. And the mother is just sort of horrified and sort of overwhelmed. Oh my God, this is terrible. They're walking through this beach, and as they're walking along, the daughter's just picking up a starfish and throwing it in the water, and then picking up another starfish, putting it in the water. And the mother looks at her and says, darling, what are you doing? What's going on? You can't possibly help all these starfish. You know, what's the point? And daughter turns to the mother and says, oh yeah, but I can help this one, and I can help this one, and I can help this one. So as it says, every small action can make a difference. And I just find that sort of parable very inspiring. You know, the daughter just does what she can, and the mother is kind of overwhelmed and sort of is engaged with horrified anxiety. So every small action makes a difference. And as we know, everything is interconnected. So we have no idea how our actions might change our world anyway. So I'm a great believer in the ripple effect, which is another favourite of mine. So for instance, if you go out today and smile at somebody, then that will cheer them up. I don't think anyone gets too grumpy when they're smiled at. And they might then go and smile at the next person that they see. And that person will then smile at the next person, and so on and so on. And so your little smile just radiates out to the world. And you don't know, you don't know that you have that sort of impact. And indeed, you may never know what impact you are having. So, for instance, when the Buddha went forth from his life of luxury, he saw the four sights, as I'm sure you're all aware of. He saw sickness, he saw old age, he saw death, but he also saw a wandering mendicant going along, and that was the sight that convinced him to go out and search for the truth. He said, yeah, actually, that's what I need to do. Now, that truth seeker probably never knew that the Buddha saw him, never knew that he played such a big part in starting this great religion of the world and the reason that we're all here today. He probably never knew. He was just going along, doing what he could, and he made this massive difference. So that's the third reminder. The fourth reminder is life has inevitable difficulties. No one can control it all. And I think this is another big one from a despair point of view. The last reminder recognizes, though, that we can't really control our life, and that as such, we need to kind of let go of attachment to results as much as we can. So in this context, we just need to accept that the climate crisis is going to change human civilization as we know it today. I mean, if you look at the challenges facing us today, we may not be able to save our civilization, but we need to recognize that climate crisis is going to change our human civilization anyway, whatever we do. Our civilization is going to end at some point, and we just need to accept that. And this is scary. This is really scary. But if we look into this fear and transcend it, then from that acceptance, peace will arise and we can begin to heal. We can begin to sort of think, because the alternative is really sort of despair, as we've talked about, and anger and fear. And that will only lead to more panic and more of a feeling of nothing can be done. And as Bhikkhu Analayo points out, there is also a change in our society. This change could actually change for the better. I mean, the civilization that we live in at the moment isn't so great. Really, is it? There is one hell of a lot of suffering going on. There's a lot of inequality. There's a lot of anger and despair out there. So perhaps a bit of change is going to be a positive thing. And perhaps we can all help to make that change a slightly more positive one, to tip the balance towards a more just and equal society. And if we can't, then at least we've tried. So I think it's incumbent on all us Buddhists to contribute to this probability, however small it might be, that there's a potential for a better society that can be realized. And perhaps climate change is accelerating that change to the better. If we can hold on to that positive view, then we can be inspired to try and make a difference, however small, and believe that we can help tip the balance just a little bit to make it more likely that it's a positive change for the better rather than a disastrous change for the worse. And just to finish with a favourite quote of mine from David Loy, the Buddhist teacher from America. He says, "Our task is to do the best we can, not knowing what the results will be, not knowing whether our actions will make any difference at all." So just to repeat that, our task is to do the best we can, not knowing what the results will be, not knowing whether our actions will make any difference at all. So that's the end of my talk. So those are my thoughts on how we can use the 4 reminders to address or approach climate change and get over this feeling of climate doomism. What I propose to do now is to lead a meditation for about 25 minutes or so, based on the 4 reminders. So it'll be we'll do a little bit of a settling stage, and then we'll do 4 reflections, one on each of the 4 reminders, just to allow things to maybe settle in and allow you to have some space to reflect, because I find that otherwise it can all get a bit heady, all these talks and stuff, and we don't allow ourselves enough time to engage with what's coming up emotionally. So if everyone would like to get into their meditation posture. So just into a posture that you can be a comfortable and alert for the next 25 minutes or so. And then when you're ready, just gently closing your eyes. Just becoming aware of yourself sitting in your room. Just any external sensations, any sounds, any movement of the air. Just grounding yourself in the present moment. Bringing your awareness to your body, sitting here, noticing the sensations of the contact to the earth, with your legs and feet, and your sitting bones on the chair or the cushion. Accepting that feeling of stability. Letting yourself relax into the ground. And then bringing your attention to your breath. Maybe taking 2 or 3 longer, deeper breaths, just to really ground yourself and arrive. Bringing your attention to your heart center, to the core of your being. Just seeing what sensations, what feelings there are there today. Any feelings of warmth, expansiveness, any feelings of tension and tightness. Just acknowledging how you are today. So meditation on the 4 reminders. In the first stage, this human birth is precious, an opportunity to awaken. So firstly, just reflect on what is precious in your life. See if you can get in touch with your core values, whatever they may be. Things that you care about most in this world. And then bringing to mind the climate disaster that we're all facing. Just seeing whether you can ask, why are you concerned about climate change? What is it that drives you from your core values to be engaged in some form of climate activism? well as any fear or anxiety that might be arising as you contemplate that. Also see if there's any positive energy in your heart center associated with those core values. Just notice if being in touch with those core values can give you some positive inspiration for facing the suffering. A second reminder, the body is impermanent, death is certain. So firstly, just spend some time recognizing the truth that everything is impermanent, noticing changes in your body sensations, your breath, and the world around you. And just reflecting on the fact that change can be positive as well as negative, especially at this time of year as spring unfolds. You can see change happening all around us, a lot of which is positive. I'm just appreciating that there are positive changes to do with the climate emergency that it isn't all doom and gloom, that there are a lot of successes and positive changes due to climate activism. Things are changing, maybe not at the pace we want, but things are happening. Just reflecting on the fact that change can happen very quickly. Joanna Macy talks about the tipping point. Things can change seemingly overnight. Up until that point, seemed completely immovable. Third reminder: the cause and effect of karma shapes the course of my life. So just get in touch with the fact that we can make a difference. However small, every action makes a difference, both externally but also to yourself. So perhaps bring to mind the starfish story. Reflect on how your actions and the actions of others can help make a difference. Then consider the interconnectedness of all things. And just recognize that we can't possibly know what impact our actions may have. As you reflect on how you and others can make a difference, just get in touch with any sense of positivity arising from these reflections. Fourth reminder: life has inevitable difficulties. No one can control it all. Firstly, just see if you can recognize that the world is changing due to climate change. And just see if you can face that fear or any anxiety that brings up. Try not to turn away from it as best you can. If you're able to acknowledge that fear and can still face it, and then also try and reflect on the fact that that change is an opportunity and it may open up a better world, a more equal and just society. Then consider how you could play a small part in contributing to this potential for a better society, however small. And then for the last couple of minutes of this meditation, just letting this David Lloyd quote really sink in and notice what feelings arise. Our task is to do the best we can, not knowing what the results will be, not knowing whether our actions will make any difference at all. Now for the last minute of this meditation, just dropping any effort that you may have been making, and just sitting, just quietly absorbing the fruits of this practice. Now in your own time, just gently bringing this meditation to a close. Okay, I think that was of use, both the talk and the meditation. I think I'm looking at Shantigarbha, but I think we're going into a sort of break for 10 minutes to grab a coffee and then we'll come back. So go and grab a coffee, do what you need to do, and we'll be back here at 10 past 10, just after.
Welcome back. So we have 20 minutes for a plenary. So what I suggest is if you have comments or reflections that you'd like to share, write them in the chat. And any questions for Sarvajit as well. So let's do comments and reflections and questions for Sarvajit. And I'll read these out. And I'll ask them, if there are questions, I'll ask Sarvajit to respond to them.
While you're thinking of questions and typing in the chat, I'd just like to give a bit of a plug to Shantigarbha's book, The Burning House, because I shamelessly stole all the ideas from his book. There's a wonderful chapter he talks about grief and stuff. So I put it into a structure of the 4 reminders, but the whole idea of transforming grief into positive emotion is just an amazing chapter within his book. So The Burning House, you can see a copy just behind him. So I thoroughly recommend that. as a way of exploring how Buddhist principles can help you engage with the climate crisis. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Sarvajit. Thanks for the recommendation. I said to Sarvajit in the break, I said, everything's borrowed. It's all borrowed. Books come from other books, I just kind of gathered it together and sort of did some reflection on it.
I think it's a great example of reuse, which obviously is one way of
Absolutely. Yes, reuse and recycle. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got some things going in the chat. So, Abhaya says, I was moved by everyone in my group. Most important seemed to be to stay connected with people who support your attempts to engage with what is needed in the world. Yes, so Sangha. Do you want to kind of talk a little bit about that, Sarvajit?
I can actually. It was one of the things that when I was putting the talk together, the model doesn't talk about Sangha at all. And actually, in the last few weeks, I've been feeling a little bit disengaged. And I hadn't been using my model to sort of help get back in touch with my motivation and stuff until I went up to the XR Rebellion last Saturday and spent some time with fellow Buddhists, doing a march and trying to raise awareness and stuff like that. And actually that re-inspired me because I was just spending time with like-minded people that were equally concerned and equally struggling to see how they engaged. I met Upeksha Shapriya was there. I met him on the Saturday. So I think it's really important, actually, and I think that's one of the real strengths with the Triratna Earth Sangha, is that we're trying to, both in a movement-wide basis, but also on a centre-by-centre basis, we're trying to get people together that are worried about the climate crisis, but don't really know how to engage with it. And so we're trying to create a very supportive environment where people can come along and ask questions and share their concerns and say, well, actually, I'm just really anxious about this, or I really don't know what to do about it, and actually recognize that everyone else is in the same sort of boat. So I think it's a really big thing, actually. Sangha is the way in which we can support it. It's the same with the whole of the spiritual life, isn't it? But I think in this quest of how do we engage with something as enormous and frightening as climate change, we need other people. So yeah.
Thank you, and I'd echo that amongst the conveners of the Triratna Sangha, that one of our main functions is to function as a support group for each other and support our efforts. Yeah, and we spend time reporting in and kind of listening to what's going on, sort of feelings of overwhelm and so forth, giving space for that. Thanks, Sarvajit. Aggie says, in our group, one interesting point that came up was what activist means. So, what does activist mean in your interpretation?
I think it's a completely wide spectrum, actually. I think we're all activists. Everything that we do is an action, isn't it? So sometimes you're not even a conscious activist. So, I mean, at one end of the spectrum, I've been listening. I was sharing a chat with Shanti Garba. We were in the same little group just now. I've been looking at a discussion between Rupert Read and Roger Hallam, both of whom were very prominent in setting up Extinction Rebellion. And Roger Hallam, for those of you that know him, is very much at one end of the sort of activist spectrum. He effectively doesn't think that unless you get arrested, you're not really doing your thing. You're right at that far end. Rupert Read is much more at you could call it the moderate flank. I think that's what he sort of terms it, end of activism. And he says that actually what's important now is that we've raised the awareness of the climate emergency, and most people are concerned about it, but are struggling to see what they can do in their everyday life, whether it's within their local community or in their workplace. What small things can they do that can make a difference? And I think that is a form of activism, really. You don't need to be out on the streets getting arrested to be called an activist. If you're recycling and you're, I don't know, talking to your friends and family about your concerns, or you're getting engaged in some local group that might be helping in some way. All those are forms of activism along this spectrum. I don't think there's a cutoff that says I'm not engaged or I'm not, or I am. I think all of it is important and all of it will make a difference. Uh, as I said in the talk, even if you don't know that you're making a difference, it will make a difference to you. I think the danger is that we just sort of get overwhelmed by it and sit out and don't do anything in our own life or engaging with others. I think we do need to be taking some sort of active interest, but how that manifests in your life, I think it's completely open.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. So a couple of responses to that, and I'll come back, Eric, I'll come back to yours in a minute. So from Apetra Priya says, in our group, we talked about non-action also being action. So we might as well do something as not doing something positive also has an effect. You want to comment on that, Savitri?
I'm just trying to parse that.
Well, non-action is also action.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
We might as well do something, do something that's karmically positive or sort of skillful.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, we can sort of choose to not do something, and that is you're accepting the status quo, which isn't necessarily a great thing. And B, that is a conscious decision. So why make that conscious decision? However small the probability is that we might make a positive change and maybe stop some elements of climate change, at least you're trying, at least you're doing what you can, and I think it's also important not to judge others. I think that's something that is a learning curve, actually. I think activists, and I would certainly include myself in this, I get very wound up about other people not taking it as seriously as me. And actually, we don't know what conditions people are living in or what their life is. I think we shouldn't judge everyone is trying to do their best to, well, as we all know, to be happy and to avoid suffering. So I think you can only take responsibility for your own actions, as Buddhism teaches us. But taking that positive action rather than choosing not to, I agree. They're both conscious decisions, so make the right decision.
Thank you.
Very good point.
Yeah. So Akasha Devi says, reminds me a bit of death cafes. So, for those who are not familiar, these are kind of conversations about death and impermanence, which we have held in Triratna on large gatherings. So maybe the Triratna Earth Sangha could in part be a kind of climate cafe forum where our anxiety, etc., is not a taboo subject. Well, that's an idea, isn't it, to have a kind of climate cafe gatherings. And, the format is you kind of have these tables you can write stuff on the table and there are different questions, different tables.
Oh, that's a really good idea. Yeah, we're planning, we have a monthly Triratna Earth Sangha meeting, as you know, because you're coming to our May one. And yes, that would be a really good topic. Jeremy, make a note. I think it's really important. I mean, it goes back to the quote of Joanna Macy that I started the talk with, is that I think we just need to recognise that being anxious and fearful is a natural reaction. If you weren't, then you probably not understood the problem. It's so we do need to recognise that and face that, and see what comes up, and then, well, exactly like Shantigarbha talks about in his book, then you can get underneath it and say, well, what are the needs that are not being met or are being threatened by this fear. So the positives, something positive can come out from it. But I think actually proactively looking at that in an anxiety cafe, great idea. Yeah.
In a community setting,
Yeah.
So Eric says, in my group, we found very helpful the idea that the wandering holy man that the Buddha to be, Siddhartha, saw would not know the impact he had. So the wandering holy man just was wandering, he was just on his daily wandering, and he had this massive impact on Siddhartha, the Buddha to be. So yes, so in a similar way, we don't know what impact we have on other people. So Savajit, is there something you'd like to say in relation to that?
I mean, I love that. I just think it's a really, it does give you that sort of hope that you're just carrying on. So when we're with Silent Rebellion, every week we meditate outside shopping centres. So we're not in any way disruptive. People can walk past, but there's this sort of area of peace, if you like, with a number of people meditating, and we have no knowledge about what impact we're having. Really, we do try and engage with people, and sometimes we have some good conversations, but typically most people just sort of walk past, very busy with their sort of retail therapy. But maybe one or two of those people notice and think, hold on, what are those guys doing? They seem, it's a very simple approach. So we're just trying to say there is an alternative. You don't need to buy into this sort of consumerist madness that we're all hooked on. And we just don't know whether that means that somebody goes back and changes their way of life. I mean, a more immediate one where I do know the impact, but only much later. I mean, I've been banging on about this stuff for ages, and my kids, who are both 30 now, typically they would just roll their eyes and think, oh, here we go, Dad's off on one again. But both of them are now vegetarian, and they've made that choice with no pressure from me, other than they've heard and seen what I've done and stuff like that. And they have at some point over that decade made the conscious decision to go vegetarian. Neither of them are Buddhists, but they've seen that. So you don't know what impact you're having, on your family and friends, but that drip, 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 banging on about it every mealtime, obviously makes a difference. Yeah.
Okay, so let's have a look at few more things. So Christine from Llangollen says, the Climate Psychology Alliance offer training in running climate cafes. Okay, she says, I'm trained as a trainer with CPA, and there may be others. Okay, so there's a resource, Christine in Clare. So Christine, can you put, if you're open to having your people getting in touch, could you put your email in the chat?
That'd be really useful.
Where are we? And related to climate cafes, Katie Earle says, I think I saw a YouTube video with Shmurti Ratner from Dharmakosha from Scotland, talking to someone who runs climate cafes in Glasgow, ? I'll look for the link later. Okay, that might be one for the Padlet. Then I want to pick up David. David says, it's too late for small things, recycling, etc. This is part of the agenda that the major polluters to displace responsibility on individuals. But then the conversation often has to start with the shape of individual lives. So would you like to comment on that, on the kind of the different ways of engaging, or the different kind of levels of this kind of issue?
Well, we don't know whether it's too late. The first thing is that we don't actually know whether it's too late for small things. So there's always the opportunity that all these small things are making a difference. And every small thing means that it's not quite as bad as if you didn't do it. So I kind of slightly disagree with that point. But I also agree that, yes, that this is what I was talking about, this climate doomism, and this is a good example of that, where people, the major polluters, if you like, are avoiding their responsibility and placing it back on the individual. But I think everything has to fit really. So I think it is important that the individual is engaged. I give talks. I give talks where I was with Cambridge Carbon Footprint, where we break down the carbon footprint of an individual, and I can't remember the numbers now, but about 80% of our carbon footprint is actually within our personal control. So whether or not we choose to travel, what food we eat, yada yada yada. Government and big business could make it much easier for us to make the right choices. So rather than subsidising plane travel, they could subsidise trains instead, so that we're not having to pay through the nose to make the right choice. But it still is our choice. It's only about 20% that is directly related to what the government do in terms of building infrastructure and stuff like that. So we do have a lot of control in our own individual life. And if more and more of us make those decisions, then big business and government will be forced to catch up, if you like. You only need to see that with vegan food. So many people have now gone vegan, and suddenly vegan is now available, fairly readily in all supermarkets. That wouldn't have happened if people hadn't made the conscious decision to make that that change in their life, even though it was difficult at the time. So every small change, I think, does actually have an impact. And the cynical side of me, one of the things that I think the tipping point that I like to think about, which is fairly cynical, but I think big business is just going to get on board and is getting on board with the climate agenda, not because of any ethics, but because actually that's where the money's gone. So that could change quite quickly, very quickly, I think. And you can see ways in which that is happening now. So yeah, hopefully that picks up on the slant.
Yeah. Okay. So something about forums. So Angela from Glasgow says there's something that comes from there's something that comes from the faith of believing the fourth sight idea has an impact of some kind when sitting silently in public. Okay, so that's the kind of fourth sight, sitting silently in public.
Yeah.
Pamela Candair in the Scottish Sangha runs Carbon Conversations, and she's a good friend of Smriti Ratna, so maybe it was her. Okay, so it'd be good to get some references here. So Sarvajit, so one would be this thing about 80% is within our choice. That if you've got a reference for that, could you put it in the Padlet?
Yeah.
And the other one would be in relation to Carbon Conversations. Angela, if you've got a website or a link for that, either now or later on, if you post that in the chat, that would also be useful. And the same with you, Christine, if you'd post your thing about the Climate Psychology Alliance in the Padlet as well. So that those are useful references. And then I'm going to come back to I've got Zoe from, oh no, wait a minute. Buddha Sevika says, I've made a bet that my kid will be vegan by aged 18. Okay, which betting firm did you use? Okay. I'd be interested to see how it turns out. And we've got Zoe from West London. What I'm hearing is people sharing their choices. What happens when those choices are removed? Sarvajit.
What do you got an example of a choice that's removed?
Well, at the moment we make our choices based on all the abundance around us. So maybe thinking about the small German town that suffered being washed away after that big storm. So maybe leading up to it, they were sitting together, sharing their choices. Would they maybe have had different discussions if they knew that a storm was coming, the river would flood, and there weren't a school, there wasn't a doctor's, the homes were gone, the infrastructure was down. So this idea of particularly as we've recently gone through COVID. So we have a sort of living memory arch of what happened at the beginning, what the results of those choices were, conversations now, and how we like to engage with things. Just thinking about that kind of wider arch about, yeah. So when I do outreach and I talk to people, often what I hear back is their choices, and I wonder, how is it like an imaginative thing without creating overwhelm and, you know, loss of breath, but what happens when those choices are gone? Because that's the reality of it, I suppose. Just thinking about, maybe that would be one of those kind of climate cafe, death cafe kind of concepts.
Yeah.
Just thinking about, because that's generally what I hear now, is people share their choices. But when I look at somewhere that has actually been hit by a tsunami or tornado, a flood, a mudslide, what I see immediately is all choices removed. And it feels like a sort of just something I wanted to kind of play with, that idea of talking, sharing choices to the point where those choices are now gone. So I don't.
Yeah.
It's sort of new and loose, and I'm just sort of just aware of it, and kind of wanted to sort of share it. Really, maybe sort of future things. But yeah, in the spirit of not wanting to go into Sainsbury's and see empty aisles and desperate people looking for toilet roll and pasta like we did around COVID. How do we maybe sort of work or practice so that we don't see that kind of knee-jerk response, but actually we see more of a resilience towards community and shared.
Yeah,
it's getting very long. I'm going to stop talking.
Yeah, I don't think I have an answer to if your village gets washed away, but I think there's a part of what I think we need to be doing in our local communities is building that resilience, if you like, and moving towards a simpler way of life that is based on abundance, that doesn't rely on consumerism or flying, halfway around the world to get a bit of sun and stuff like that. So it's trying to get back to a simpler way of life where you're enjoying local community and local facilities, yada yada, and making sure that people recognise that that's a positive choice, that actually that could be a really rich and fulfilling life. In fact, more so than the more frantic sort of chasing around, just buying things. That actually we're not, in terms of where the next phase of our community, of our society is going to be. That's actually that there can be a very positive image to that in terms of rebuilding community and all working together. That we don't have to have this fragmented society anymore. Whereas a lot of climate choices are framed in terms of what you're going to give up and what you can't do anymore. And I think that whole framing of the conversation needs to change. And that would then make you that much more resilient when disaster does happen. So from that perspective, if you've built that local community, you're working, you're living off the land a little bit more, yada yada, it could help to some degree as and when society breaks down.
Thanks, Sarvjit. So maybe just one last quick question from Nitin, or point really from Nitin in York. Please, can you differentiate non-action from inaction? For instance, meditation is the most effective positive form of non-action. Would you like to comment on that, Sarvjit?
Well, I think I can agree with that. Lindsay. I mean, I think that's one of the experiences we have within XR Buddhists when we're engaged in Extinction Rebellion stuff, that actually there is a very positive impact that we have. Again, Shantidharma talks about it in his book, some of his own personal experiences where, just a different approach to active, being active, or what's the word? Activism. By almost withdrawing and that effect of non-action is palpable at times when we're just meditating quietly. So yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I'll be careful about that next time.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarvajit. So let's give Sarvajit a silent wave, celebration, appreciation, or it could also be a kind of little bow to say thank you very much to Sarvajit for presenting this session. There's more coming this afternoon, 3:30 to 5 and 7:30 to 9. So I'll be the host for those sessions. I'll be the host today and tomorrow. So this afternoon we'll be welcoming Akupa, who wrote a book called Saving the Earth a number of years ago, and has been involved in this area for longer than I can remember. So he'll be leading some study this afternoon and Tuesday and Wednesday, tomorrow and Wednesday afternoons. And then this evening we've got Ananta, originally from the UK, but now chair of the New York Triratna New York Buddhist Center, and he'll be talking about how to engage with the emotional aspects of overwhelm and grief and so on, and turning them into gold, I believe. So that's it. We're done for now. So see those of you who are free at 3:30 to 5 for a study session with Akupa. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
I'll unmute everybody if you want to say goodbye. Just so we can all have a kind of.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.